All right, so we are now live and recording, and it's now 8:02, so I want to respect everyone's time, so we will get started. So for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Danielle Hornung, and I work with the community engagement team here at JDRF, and thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us today. We are thrilled to be here with you. And on behalf of JDRF and Diabetes at School, we'd like to welcome you to our first webinar in the Let's Talk T1D educational series. And today our speaker will be Elizabeth Moreau from Diabetes at School. And our topic is getting ready for school with type 1 diabetes. And so before we launch into this, I just want to go through a couple of housekeeping items in case there's folks who have not used Teams before. And so just to let you know that when you hover over your screen, you're going to see a toolbar that pops up and there's a little camera icon. If you do have your camera on, everyone else on the call is going to be able to see you. So not during the presentation, but just so that people are aware of this and that you have the option to turn your camera off. And so while we're recording, if we can ask everyone to turn their cameras off, that would be great. And then we'll get Elizabeth set up here in a second with the PowerPoint. And also too, I am going to mute everyone as we have a really large group here. So to minimize any background noise, we would like to proceed like this for the presentation. And as I mentioned, if you hover over on your Teams, you'll see that there is it looks like a word bubble. If you pull this up, this allows the meeting chat. If you have any questions at any point, please enter those in the chat. And then once Elizabeth is finished her presentation, we'll have a lot of time to go through any questions. Time permitted, we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can. There is a raise hand button as well, but what we're going to do is try to get to everyone in the chat for that. And so to let everyone know as well, I know it's on a lot of people's mind, and we will be discussing COVID-19 in a general way, but we at JDRF, we cannot make any recommendations on whether or not your family should be going back to school or not. This is a family decision, and we'll touch on this, but this is something that we can't answer that question for you. It's something that is a decision made on a family-to-family basis. And a quick note too, that we have families joining us this evening, which is absolutely amazing, and we love that. But some of the conversations that might happen might paint a very real picture of some of the challenges that do come with living with type 1 diabetes. So we just want to put that disclaimer out there, and we will have the recording as well available after the session to you. And it is with, I'm thrilled to bring here and have present tonight Elizabeth Moreau, who is the Director of Communications and Knowledge Translation at the Canadian Paediatric Society, and she is the staff lead for Diabetes at School. She has 2 children, the youngest of whom was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2013 at the age of 4. And as well too, just alongside Elizabeth, we have Nadine and Tori Yacey, who are 2 longstanding dedicated volunteers at JDRF, and they're here to talk about their experiences within the school system as well, and we're thrilled to have them on board here. So again, I'm just going to make sure that I'm muting everybody here. Give me just a second here. Sorry, guys. Okay, so there we go. We've muted everyone again here. So without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Elizabeth to begin the presentation portion that we have tonight. And once again, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for being here.
Oh, thanks, Danielle. Can you hear me okay? Okay, and I'm going to try to share my screen in 1 second. I just want to say thanks to JDRF for doing this presentation. Thanks to all of you who are here. Thanks especially to those little voices we just heard, because that's why we're here. And that was a pleasure to hear that little voice singing. So let me see if I can get my screen up. You should be seeing a PowerPoint. Is that working? Danielle, I can't see anything. Can you just unmute and say, yes, it's working?
Yes, I see that.
Wonderful. Okay. So welcome, everyone.
Sorry, Elizabeth, if you can unmute yourself, please. There we go. Oh, you're still muted, Elizabeth. Oh.
Okay.
Elizabeth, there we go. You are unmuted.
All right, let me go back. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen and we can now hear you as well.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. So when we started talking with JDR way back in the late spring, early summer about this session, the objective was to develop a workshop that would benefit many of the families who are going to school with type 1 for the first time. So you might have a child in JK or in kindergarten, maybe grade 1. And then the whole lot of families who have also been diagnosed since kids have been home from school in March will also be going to school with diabetes for the first time, of all ages. So these were the objectives that we set for the session. We want to talk about preparing for back to school, where you can find resources to help you, and make sure your child and your child's school are prepared. And of course, we know that the elephant in the room is COVID. I echo what Danielle said, but we will have a chance to talk about some considerations on how you make that decision about going back to school, and some things that, that might help reassure you regardless of what your decision is. So Danielle mentioned that my youngest child has type 1, so this is why I'm here. 7 years ago, in the summer of 2013, I was getting ready to send her to school for the first time. It was overwhelming. It was very scary. So if any of you are doing this for the first time, know that any of us who's done it, we get it. It's very challenging, but it will be okay. There's a lot that's happened in the last 7 years, both at the policy level and I think at the resource level, that does make it a little bit easier to do, and you will all be okay. The fact that you're here tonight trying to get ready is just one indication of how committed you are. One of the challenges with sending your child back to school with diabetes is that it's an invisible disease. And so when children are doing well, adults, teachers might just forget that your child has a special medical need. And most people just don't know how much work it takes for all of you to keep your child with type 1 healthy. So what we want to do when we go back to school is always strike a balance. So we want the folks taking care of our kids and with our kids all day to be very vigilant, to keep them safe, to support them, to understand them. But at the same time, we want our kids to fit in. We don't want them stigmatized. We don't want them singled out. We don't want them sitting on the sidelines. We want to make sure people understand that they're children first and that they're a child with type 1 second. So this is a very important balance to strike in everything that we do. So before I get into anything, as Danielle mentioned, I'm not a health professional. I work for an organization of health professionals, and I'm privileged to work alongside pediatric endocrinologists, many of the physicians who take care of your children. And what I want you to know about everything that follows is that all of the information is based on the best available knowledge that has been developed by experts. So 2 key documents that you want to be aware of, that you want to be familiar with, are from the Canadian Paediatric Society and the Canadian Pediatric Endocrine Group, and from Diabetes Canada. And these are the 2 sort of gold standards of care for kids with type 1 in school. So these are the 2 documents and 3 organizations that are standing behind everything that follows. So what do the experts agree on? First and foremost, that every child with type 1 should have an individual care plan. Secondly, that at least 2 personnel are designated in a school to provide the support that a child with type 1 needs, regardless of their age. Some kids who are younger will need time and space for meals and snacks and might need to be supervised. We want to make sure that our kids can check their blood sugar, can eat anytime, anywhere in their school. And this would apply to insulin administration as well. We want to make sure that all staff are trained to recognize and treat low blood sugar, because that's going to pose the most immediate danger, if you will, to kids when you send them back to school. We want to make sure that there are accommodations for exams and tests as needed particularly for older kids. And, since we've last gathered, we've had a wonderful new product on the market, nasal glucagon, also called Baqsimi. We want to make sure that that's available at schools. Before Baqsimi, we would be talking about the challenges of injectable glucagon. We don't have to. So hopefully your clinic has given you a prescription for Baqsimi. If they haven't, by any chance, by all means, ask them, and it should be fairly easy to receive. So before we talk about what we want from schools, what are our responsibilities as parents? So I've grouped them into 4 kind of overall things that we need to think about. The first one, and perhaps most important, is communication, because having a good relationship with your school and with the staff at your school is going to help your child and managing their type 1 on a day-to-day basis. The care plan is getting the care plan initiated is our responsibility. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Training is often going to fall to us. So we want to think about the type of training we deliver, when we deliver it, how much time we should expect, what's reasonable, and things like that. And of course, supplies, making sure that our kids have enough of them, there's enough in school, everything is properly labeled, we have a way to replenish them, that they're in the right places in school. That's all going to be our primary responsibilities. Now, I suppose everything that I say comes with caveats of this is not a normal school year for anyone. Some of these things will be, for some of us, easier this year. Many of our kids, if they're cohorted, they're going to be in one classroom all day long. This is going to be a little bit easier than in previous years where our kids are moving around the school. And some things, like maybe communication, might be more challenging. And we'll talk a little about that in a few minutes. In general, we've developed this little back to school checklist to help you kind of think through the things that you need to be doing, or at least considering. You may not need all of these depending on whether you're, depending on how old your child is, whether this is the first year back at school or the 5th year back at school, what kind of relationship you already have with the school staff, your child's regimen, and so on. There are a lot of variables that go into managing type 1 at school. But in general, here's some things that you should probably think about whether you need to do. Of course, you want to contact the school. You want to do that as soon as your child is diagnosed. You've probably already done that already and tried to start talking through setting up meetings. They might be virtual, they might be phone calls, but setting up meetings with the people who are going to be taking care of and in contact with your child. You want to find your school board's policy on managing type 1. You can usually look on your school board's website. If you can't find one, or if you think your school doesn't have one, look for your provincial policy. Most provinces have a policy. There are a couple who don't, but most of them do have a policy. So find that, and it at least gives you a starting point of what you can expect for your child. You want to complete that individual care plan. I would suggest that if your board or province has a template, use that one. Using forms that your school and school staff are already familiar with and using is going to go over well. If they don't, Diabetes at School has a template that you can use, and it's on the website. You're going to want to arrange for training, get your training materials together. We'll talk a bit about that. You're going to want to get your supplies together. You're going to want to think about a communication system with the school. So how do you communicate? Is it by text? Is it by email? Is it by phone? How often and under what circumstances? So do you get contacted every time your child is low or every time your child's blood sugar is above a certain reading? And all of that, those details should be in your individual care plan. You're going to want to prepare your child as much as you can and try to make it special. Try to inject some fun into it. There are things you can do. You can, choose kind of fun boxes for the emergency kits. You can get kind of cute labels to put on their food and things like that. So involve them so that they know what's going on and that they can take part in it, and that these kind of extra things that maybe their friends don't have to do, don't seem too onerous for them. You're going to want to think about what other contacts your child has with other adults during the school day. Could be bus drivers, could be before and after school programs. And again, this year may be very different, but in general, this is the kind of thing you need to think about. And then do plan to check in to see how things are going. Most of us check in quite often. This is not something that most of us need to hear, but certainly at the beginning, if this is, you know, your first time back to school or your first year in a new school with new teachers, you're going to want to just touch base and see how things are going. At minimum, after the first week, probably after a day or two, you're going to want to see how things are going, and maybe you need to adjust your plans. So the individual care plan, this is the, you know, the most important document for us. It has everything related to our children's diabetes management at school. The template on diabetes at school is very comprehensive. It's quite long. It's intended to have every situation covered so that you don't have to think about it, so that you can just fill in the blanks for the things you need, and you can just scratch out the things you don't need. But as I said, if your board has a template, start with that one. And if you need to add information, then you can do that too. At minimum, your individual care plan needs to cover when and how often to check blood sugar, how to treat low blood sugar, how to treat high blood sugar, how and when to administer insulin if need be at school. Some kids don't have insulin at school, but I think most kids probably do. How to cover meals and snacks. You want to look at before, during, or after activity. And any other aspects of their care at school, depending on your particular situation. So you really want this to cover everything. All the way in the office, you may need help from your team to complete it. I suspect most teams are probably used to helping parents go through this. And then this is the document you want to use as kind of the centerpiece, if you will, for your initial meeting with principals and teachers, so that it gives you a bit of a plan that you can walk through and guide them through all of the different aspects of care. Some of the things that might not be in the plan are things like, you know, how do you arrange your snacks and your lunches so that all your carbs are pre-counted, for example. This is not, we don't want school staff, and nor should they be or would they expect it to be counting carbs to administer insulin. You want to make sure you think about how are your lunches and snacks going to be labeled. Are you going to use sticky notes? Are you going to use a notebook? Things like that. Your care plan probably won't cover what you do with field trips. This is perhaps not something we need to think about in 2020, 2021. There may be just virtual field trips, unfortunately, but field trips are something that generally we need to think about how we're going to handle those. Special events with food and changes to the activity routine. So, for example, there's going to be extra phys ed next week, or there's not going to be any phys ed next week. And you've got sort of your insulin regimen is all arranged around a certain level of activity. The important thing here is to communicate to teachers and principals that if you know things are coming up, you can make arrangements to adjust the plan, adjust your regimen so that your child can participate. Because I think we've all, those of us who've had kids in school have all been in situations where after the fact, we learn that something has happened that our child has had to be excluded from because someone decided, maybe we're not sure what to do, so we're just going to not let you have that special treat that everybody else is having. And that makes us all feel badly. So communicate that with advance notice. Our kids can do everything. That's where the communication all year long is so important. And then supply teachers, you may want to, because the individual care plan is long, it probably only sits in the office. It's probably not sitting on your child's teacher's desk. Sometimes what I've done in the past is have a little letter that says, "Dear supply teacher," with my child's photo on it, and says, my name is, and I have type 1, and this is what this means. So just a little kind of crash course in diabetes, what someone might need to know for the 6 hours that they're in your child's classroom. So these are 2 documents on the site on diabetes at school that I would encourage you to print out to include in your teacher kits that will help school staff better understand some non-standard situations and some of the whys behind what's in your plan. So this is not the technical stuff about diabetes, but this is trying to give school staff an understanding of what it's like to have diabetes and to be in school, and what school staff and teachers do to support our kids. And again, they help convey this message that with planning and collaboration, our kids don't have to miss out on anything that's going on in school. So they help to dispel some of the common myths that people who aren't familiar with type 1 have about kids. So encourage you to share these with your school, to then encourage your schools to put them up in the staff room where everybody can see them and, and start to learn. So often we're the ones doing the training. Big clinics don't have the capacity to do training, although this may differ depending on where you live. If your school insists on quote unquote medical training, explain to them that diabetes at school has resources that, well, they can guide themselves through it. But that you're using resources from Diabetes at School, which is a site that was developed by diabetes experts, including physicians and nurses. So this is not just information that, that has been developed by parents, but it's been developed by medical experts. On the site, you'll see 3 levels of information, depending on how much the person you're training needs to know. And school staff need different levels of training. So I think it's really important to give people the information that they need and not too much information, because it can be a bit overwhelming to hear everything about diabetes. If you kind of think back to diagnosis, there was just so much to learn. There's no way that we can convey everything to someone at school, nor do we need to. So think about what kind of contact a given teacher or staff member has with your child, and what the context is, and then what they need to know. The information can also be used for, as I mentioned, for bus drivers, for before and after school staff. By the way, if you have a babysitter, this is the kind of information you can share with them as well. So these are just the 3 levels down there. You've got awareness, literacy, and expertise, and it kind of, each one builds on the other depending on what someone is doing. So if someone is overseeing insulin administration, they need more information than someone who's, not having much contact with your child. These are 2 other key documents that are available on the site. They're kind of little poster formats that you can print out. Again, I would encourage schools to put these up in their staff rooms because everyone in a school where there's a child with type 1 diabetes, everyone in the school needs to understand that there's a risk of low blood sugar. They need to be able to recognize it, and they need to know what to do to treat it, because that is the biggest risk that our kids face going to school every day. So these are critical pieces that should be part of your teacher kit. The opposite side of the low blood sugar piece does have a little bit of an algorithm in terms of what to do. So as I mentioned a couple of times, make sure that you tailor the training for what someone needs to know. And here's an example. There's a document on the site called Physical Activity in Type 1, what school staff need to know. That's an ideal piece for gym teachers. And that might be, in addition to the piece about lows, this may be all that your gym teacher needs to know. Talks about the relationship between physical activity and type 1, how if you're already high, activity can make you go higher. So please, let's not have our kids running laps to bring their blood sugar down. And then it gives you some key points about physical activity, and then some actions that school staff can take. So it's designed to be practical for them. If the site is designed to help school staff feel empowered. There are a lot of myths about diabetes, as we all know, and some adults are a little fearful of caring for someone with type 1. The resources on the site are designed to remove that fear and to provide people with the information they need so that they feel comfortable. And if nothing else, I would encourage your schools to at least have a look at the video series. Sometimes it's, there's a lot of text-based information to read. They may not have time for that. Each video is just about 2 minutes long. There's about 10 of them that cover all the basic concepts around diabetes, and they're designed for an audience that has not had the kind of education that you've had from your clinic. So in less than 10 minutes, there's a lot that they can learn there. When it comes to supplies, you want to make sure that you have a number of kits going into the school, put them in multiple locations. At minimum, you want a kit in your child's primary classroom, the classroom that they're in for most of the day. I know some of you will have your children carrying their equipment with them in a little backpack or things like that. Have an extra kit in the office. It's always a good idea. You may want to have one in the gym, places like that. So it's always a good idea to send 3 or 4 kits to school. What's in them? It really varies, and depending on a lot of things, depending on how long your child is at school. Are they there for before and after school programs, or just for the day? How far away are you from home? How quickly can you get to school? That type of thing. But at minimum, you want your kit to include equipment to check blood sugar. Even if your child has a CGM, make sure there's a meter in there, test strips, lancets, and fast-acting sugar to treat low blood sugar. So that's the minimum you want in there. And then you can add some carb snacks. Obviously, you'd want your name and contact numbers in there and so on. Some people put things like extra insulin pens or pen needles, things like this. Just keep in mind that some of this stuff does expire. So you want to make sure, again, that you have, that you know what you've sent, where it is, and what's in it and how often you need to replenish it. I've received kits at the end of the year that have had things, like foods and stuff that has expired. So just keep that in mind. Many of our kids are going to school with technology. Many of our kids are going to school with CGMs or insulin pumps, one or both. So this means they have extra devices. They have devices that it might be their phone, their smart device, or devices that look like phones. So we've created 2 resources that are on the site to give school staff an idea of what a child might be carrying or what a child might be wearing. So there's just very, very basic information about CGMs and insulin pumps. We have pictures of of most of them, as well as just a little bit of a cheat sheet in terms of what they do. So these, again, if your child has one of these devices, rather than give them the the owner's manual for your pump, maybe provide this to them so that they can just have a little bit of familiarity with what is going on with their student. And then before we get into a quick discussion about COVID, I just want to point you to this document, which is up on the site, and it's about involving children in diabetes management. Because particularly when children are young, we've heard stories about schools wanting or expecting children to move towards self-management maybe more quickly than a parent or family is comfortable with. Or you might hear about other kids, doing diabetes tasks and think, well, maybe my child should be doing more of that. There is no right or wrong, of course. And what the charts do is they look at, okay, from a child development point of view, and we develop these in collaboration with not just pediatric endocrinologists, but community pediatricians, to look at what do children do at particular ages. What is the kind of the developmental profile of a child of a particular age, and how does that translate into typical diabetes tasks? So if you look, for example, at children 4 to 5 years old, we really wouldn't expect 4 to 5-year-olds to be checking their own blood sugar. They may be able to choose a finger or offer a finger, but that's about all we really should expect from them. So hopefully this chart can be helpful if you're having to explain to schools, or if you're thinking about, well, geez, what should my child be doing, and what should I be expecting an adult to do for them or with them. Okay, so going back to school right now, it's very difficult for all of us, whether our kids have type 1 or not. As Danielle said, no one can make the decision or make a recommendation, and I think that many people on the call you've probably already spoken with your team, and hopefully what you hear will be consistent with what your team has already told you. thing is, there are a whole lot of variables that go into making a decision about going back to school right now. Different provinces have different plans, different boards have different plans. But here in general are some of the considerations that you might, think about. These are some of the variables to help you get to a decision. So the first thing is, what's going on in your community? Is there a lot of virus? Is there very little virus? I think generally across Canada, the virus rates are fairly low, but there may be differences from community to community. One thing that health experts do agree on is that one of the key ways to keep kids and school staff safe is to keep transmission rates in the community safe. So think about that. And when kids do go back to school, you're going to want to keep an eye on what's going on through your public health department. Your school protocols. So what steps is your school board taking to keep transmission rates at a minimum? These could be enhanced hygiene, physical distancing, masking for kids of certain ages or in certain situations. Could be more outdoor education, etc. But most, if not all, Canadian schools are taking certain steps, usually kind of a basket of things to help keep transmission rates low. Of course, you need to think about your individual risk as a family. So the risk in my house is not going to be the same as the risk in your house. If you're living in a multi-generational household with grandparents or older relatives, naturally, your thinking is going to be different because you have people living in your house who are more vulnerable. If you have someone who is undergoing cancer treatment, obviously that's another consideration. Someone who's immunocompromised, that's a different consideration. So that individual risk as a family is a really important consideration. Regardless of those, your own tolerance for risk is also a consideration, because as long as there's virus out there, there will always be some risk, even if it's very, very low. Different people have different comfort levels with risk. So you need to think about that. If your child was in school when the pandemic was declared and was sent home, then they have some experience with distance learning. How did that go? Were they good online learners? Did they enjoy online learning? Did that work well for them? Or was it more challenging? How did their mental and emotional health fare during that time in these, 5 or 6 months out of school? So you're really going to want to think about your own individual child and how they're doing, and how they may or may not do with remote learning. And then an really important consideration is going to be supports related to their type 1. This might apply more to younger children, but if they need someone to help with their insulin administration or their blood sugar checks, will that support be available? We all know that there's a lot going on in schools right now, so you're going to want to make sure that that's available. What we should say, though, is that just because there's a global pandemic doesn't mean our children don't have the same rights that they had before this pandemic was declared. So our children have the right to be included, to be supported, and to be safe in school. They had it last year and they have it now. So this situation is not an excuse for not providing that support. Just want to really make sure that it's there. And so we do have a resource to help provide more information that goes into more detail than what I just said here. It was released today. Some of you may have seen it. It was produced with Diabetes at School, with some pediatric endocrinologists, with JDRF and Diabetes Canada. It's on diabetesatschool.ca. Just go under For Parents and you'll see it there, the first link. But the upshot is that all other things being equal, and there are a lot of other variables, but all other things being equal, type 1 in and of itself doesn't put your child, my child, at a higher risk of contracting COVID or of having more serious illness if they do get sick. Of course, when our children get any kind of virus, it tends to wreak havoc with their blood sugar. So, whether they get a cold or whether they get the flu, or should they happen to contract COVID, we may see lots of highs that we have to manage. So a really important thing is to make sure that you're really familiar with your sick day guidelines. If you're new to type 1, you may not have had to use those guidelines yet. Kids are not getting as many viruses as they usually do right now. Make sure you're familiar with your sick day guidelines. Make sure you know how to manage ketones. Make sure you know how to get in touch with your clinic. Make sure you have ketone testing materials, whether they're urine strips or blood ketones strips and meters available. So make sure you're familiar with all of that in the event that your child does contract either COVID or some other viral illness over the next few months. And then finally, I think the best advice, if you will, it's not advice, but just think to yourself, if my child didn't have type 1, would I feel comfortable sending them back? And you may be asking that about your other children as well. So again, I encourage you to go look at the document, have a read through it. We hope that it's the same kind of guidance that your clinic is giving you to make this decision. It's not an easy decision, but hopefully it will help answer some of the questions that you have and make you feel more comfortable, whatever that decision happens to be. So I am going to stop here and I guess turn it back over to Danielle for questions or discussion.
Hello, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So what we're going to be doing now is we will go through the questions that are in the chat right now. And Elizabeth, is it possible for this piece, can we get you to flip your camera back on, if that's possible? Amazing, there you are.
Here we go.
And just to let everyone know as well, we are going to send out a link to the COVID and diabetes in school that Elizabeth was just mentioning. So we'll go to a question here that was in the chat. And please, if anyone else has any questions that they would like to put in the chat, please feel free to do so. And as well, too, we also have the opportunity to connect with Tora and Nadine, who are involved with JDRF and as longstanding volunteers. And Tora has been an amazing youth ambassador with us here, and they are happy to speak about their particular experience as well. So if you do have a question, please let us know in the chat who you would like us to direct the question to. And so the first question that we have for Elizabeth is, do the recommendations of 2 personnel at school to support your child remain in place with the COVID-19 situation?
So yes, absolutely. And there may be other questions as well that are along these lines. And the most, I think, the guiding principle here is that just because we're in a global pandemic, as serious as that is, that doesn't change the needs of our kids. And so it's really important that we as parents advocate and communicate that message, that everything that our child needed in February 2020, they still need in September 2020, regardless of whether or not there's a pandemic. Those rights are still in place. So it's up to us, I think, as parents, to articulate those needs very clearly in the individual care plan. If there is some, negotiation, there may be some negotiation or compromise that you need to do. But I would encourage all of you to go forward, not in a militant or aggressive way, but with the confidence that, your child still has the right to all of these different supports that they need.
Thank you. And so the next question comes to us from Carter Gill, and we may have answered this already, but they wanted to know if we'll be reviewing how school care has changed and your rights with regard to going back to school in the pandemic for those who have had kids in school for the past several years with diabetes. And so again, I think you've gone over that. And then as well as I mentioned, we will be sending out the link to that position statement and the position paper. And so I don't know if there's anything, Elizabeth, though, that you wanted to add on that question.
Mm-hmm. Well, this will be a good conversation to have perhaps in October again, for all of us to kind of compare notes on whether anything has changed. And maybe October is too long, maybe the end of September, to see, has anything changed? And do we need to do a bit of collective advocacy? Because I think that if all of us are experiencing similar challenges, then we may need to self-organize and do a bit of collective advocacy to help one another and to help our kids.
Excellent. The next question comes to us from Stuart. Are there expectations we have of teachers in terms of helping the child manage lows, supervise injections, etc.?
You mean what expectations do we have with regards to those things?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So it's going to vary depending on your school and the situation. So we typically speak of school staff as opposed to teachers, because it's really different in every school and in every setting. In some schools, children with type 1, especially who are young, are assigned a sliver of an EA's time to help them with some of those tasks. That may be a challenge this year if EAs are restricted to, and I don't really like to speculate on what's going on because nobody knows what's going on, but the point is that if a child needs help to check blood sugar and then to put some numbers into a pump, then someone needs to provide that help. I know that's not prescriptive, but again, since it differs in every school, we don't like to say, well, it's a teacher who has to do this, or it's a such and such role that needs to do that. But we just say that this needs to happen, and then work with your school, with your principal, to find the appropriate staff member to do that.
Great, thank you. The next question comes to us from Amanda, who asks, kids with type 1 aren't at more of a risk for the disease, but if it happens, they can have issues with BG, blood glucose, having gone through mono with type 1. Should we be concerned about the long-term impact of prolonged high blood glucose during illness?
Well, that sounds like a question for a health professional. What I will say is that the clinics are advising to be very familiar with your sick day guidelines, so that if your child does contract an illness, whether it's COVID or something else during this time, that you're able to manage those highs. And as a parent, if you can't manage them within a very reasonable period of time, you need to reach out to your clinic soon. Before it gets to the point where your child's at risk of DKA or has prolonged. So please do not wait. Reach out to your clinic if you're having trouble, if there's any kind of viral illness, COVID or otherwise. But if you're having trouble getting those blood sugars down, reach out to your clinic for help.
Great. And next question from Kristen. How does a parent establish an IEP for a T1D student headed to a new high school?
Okay, so I just want to clarify that the care plan is an ICP. So that's an individual care plan. An IEP, so an individual education plan, is something very different. And that's not what our kids have, unless your child may have an IEP for a learning challenge or another need, but it's not for diabetes. So an individual care plan is a document that outlines all of the things that need to happen in order for a child to manage their diabetes throughout the day. So how do you establish one for a child in high school? Just because a child or a youth is involved in their own management doesn't mean that they shouldn't have a care plan on file, and doesn't mean that the teachers should not be aware of it. So how do you do that? My suggestion would be that you, again, sort of look to see whether your board has a template. Well, let me back up one step. Make sure, first of all, that your school knows your child has a medical condition, right? In some provinces, and if your child is identified as having a medical condition like type 1, they will initiate these forms to be filled out. but now's probably not a good time to be waiting for the school boards to contact you. So find out whether your school has a template. If they do, use that document. If they don't, go to diabetes@school.ca, look up individual care plan, and you'll find templates there. Fill that out. If you need help from your team, solicit their help in filling that out. Most of them are pretty familiar with that form. And then make sure that that form gets to your principal so that they know about it. As I said, it's really important. Even if your 14 or 15-year-old is doing a lot of their self-care, it's absolutely essential that the principal and that every one of their classroom teachers knows that they have type 1, knows how to recognize and treat a low. And also, you want to think about accommodations as well for tests and exams, so that if your 14-year-old experiences a low right before the exam, you want to make sure that they have some extra time to treat the low, recover from the low, and still have time to do their assignment.
Great, thank you. The next question comes to us from Kenny. And Kenny asks, has there been a case of COVID in a person, and how severe was it? And I can jump in quickly there and just say that there have been cases, and my colleague Erica is going to be posting in the chat a link on the JDRF blog that we do have an individual who's talking about her experiences of being type 1 and living through the experience of having COVID. So we'll post that link there in the blog. Again, it's just one story, but it goes through a personal experience. And Elizabeth, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add there.
No, I appreciate your answering that question. Thank you.
Great. Okay. And so I am going back here to Ella and Mom. And I believe she's answering Kristen, but I'm just going to go through the comment here. IEPs are for specific educational needs. That's different than a medical plan, as Elizabeth mentioned as well. A child with T1 may need both, but an IEP is not automatic for a child with type 1 diabetes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Great. And Sarah had another question. Will we be developing an updated resource or will anyone be developing an updated resource that explains how to administer nasal glucagon?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We are, yes, Diabetes at School will very, very soon be updated. I'm so sorry that it's not updated right now, but it will be updated with some graphics that we received from Lily, the maker of Baqsimi, just to show, the how it's administered and things like that, and to make reference to it so that folks know it's an alternative. So thanks for that.
Great. And so for the next question here, I believe that this is likely in response to a previous comment, but perhaps it's a good point of clarification that Nona asked, how come we said that kids with type 1 diabetes are not at more risk? And that was reading a previous comment, but I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add there, Elizabeth?
Just to clarify, again, I'm not a health professional, but having worked with them, and just to remember that type 1 is an auto, and this is good for us to be able to explain this to other people, even in our own families, because folks hear on the news, keep hearing on the news about how diabetes is a risk factor, and you might have family members worried about your children. Just remind them that the experience and the data around complications and risk factors are primarily around adults with type 2 diabetes, many of whom have underlying conditions. Also remind them that type 1 is an autoimmune disorder. It doesn't mean our children are immunocompromised. So kids and adults who have well-controlled type 1 diabetes are not at any more risk, it seems, than any other healthy person.
Great, thank you so much. And again, we'll just reiterate too, if you have any specific questions, definitely connect with your care team and medical professionals. And so we do have a comment from Amanda, and I am just going, before I read this out, I just wanted to ask if there are any additional questions. We will get those into the chat as we're coming towards the end of our questions. And so Amanda writes in that, I'm concerned that the information that has come out from my daughter's school board is that only essentials are to be brought to school and are to be taken home at the end of every day, along with no parents being allowed inside the classroom at any point of the day. Any suggestions or thoughts on this with a T1D child, as they need to have supplies, kits left in the classrooms? I am also normally at the school 2 to 3 times a week checking in with the teachers.
Right, right. Yeah, I think, I think a lot of us who have kids with type 1 are used to being at schools a lot. So things will definitely be different this year. All I can say is, again, this is all about communication. So it's August 17th. Things are still up in the air, but now is a really good time to reach out to your principal, start with the principal and give them a heads up. So that, because there's going to be a lot going on in those first days of school, but give them a heads up that our kids need certain supplies with them all the time, right? So I think that's and this goes back to, will your child get the kind of supports you need? How hard will you have to advocate for them, and so on and so forth. But again, our kids need these supplies with them all the time. So make sure that your school, your principals, your teachers have a heads up, so that you're being proactive about this.
Great, thank you. And so a question from Kim. My young son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes this year, and recent blood tests show extremely low antibody levels. His sugars are also very uncontrolled. Should I be more cautious? And before I pass it over, Elizabeth, if there's anything, this really sounds to me like, again, a medical question where you're going to need to connect back with your medical team to answer that question. Yeah. And again, they should be there for any questions that you have like this to help make sure that you feel confident in how to proceed.
Absolutely. I echo that. I'm sorry for the diagnosis, but I totally agree with Danielle.
Great. Any last call? Oh, yes. Amna, if there are any concerns, at what level should we be advocating to the principal, trustee, board, or province?
Well, it's interesting. We are doing another webinar on Wednesday about advocacy, because it's something that that many of us have to face. It's always best, if you can, to sort it out at the school level. So if you don't have to escalate something, try not to right off the bat. Try as much as you can to solve it at the level, particularly now, when we know that our schools are just being pulled in a million different directions. It's a really challenging time for them. So again, going back to the real basics of advocacy, of good communication, collaboration, being willing to help. What can I do? How can I help as a parent? While being very clear about your child's needs, but saying, how can I help? What can I do? I know this is a tough time for you, but what can I do to help? There's always clinics to help. I know many clinics are, more than willing to be of assistance when there's some challenges. So you can explore that as well. Are there times where you have to escalate it? Yes, there are. But we always recommend doing everything you can to keep it in the school, and make sure too that that you're, again, back to the communication, that you're really clear on what the problem is. Sometimes there are just misunderstandings on what you're asking or on what the school is willing to give. But yeah, do come to our webinar on Wednesday about advocacy and hear lots more, hopefully helpful tips about how to advocate for your child in school.
That's great. And just in case anyone did have any questions, that will be this coming Wednesday, which is the 19th at 8 p.m. Eastern. And we'll send a link as well out if anyone has any questions about that. Great. And so next question comes from Stuart. If we're having difficulty managing issues with the school, is there anyone at your organization that we can reach out to?
So Diabetes at School is a collaboration. It's the Canadian Paediatric Society, which is the organization that I work for, Diabetes Canada, and the Canadian Paediatric Endocrine Group. So we're actually not an organization. So if there are challenges in school, try to explore some of the resources on the website. And then and look at the JDRF has wonderful resources, so does Diabetes Canada. And then the other thing I would recommend is reaching out to other parents, because I think there are a lot of people on this call and not on this call who've, been through similar situations and who are really smart about figuring out how to solve problems at school. So if you're not already connected by Facebook, there are a few good, really good Facebook groups of parents out there. And then, of course, JDRF is a wonderful source of parents connecting with parents. So that's the other thing that I would suggest is finding a parent who's been through it and who can kind of guide you along the way.
And on that note as well, just if anyone is not aware that JDRF as well, we do offer a mentorship program where we can connect individuals with those who have successful lived experience. And I see someone, Jacqueline, in the chat has just added that as well. So we can definitely connect people who may be experiencing similar situations. So we would be happy to support as well. And that's wonderful. And Jacqueline is a mentor. Amazing. Thank you. And the next question that we have, which I can answer this one here from Carrie, if we can't make the next session online, can we still access the video or information attached with it? Yes, we will be posting those through JDRF, through our public channels, and those will come out after the sessions. And I can also answer the question from Wade, does JDRF have a message board or blog where parents can connect and post questions? We don't have kind of an open blog. We have a blog on our website, but we don't have kind of an open forum connection, kind of like an open, like Reddit. We don't have anything like that. Do we have any other questions? All right. Well, and Erica has just posted a link as well to our mentorship program. And so question from Sylvia here, have any type 1 diabetic children died of COVID? I don't want to make a claim personally on that. I don't actually have the answer to that question. Elizabeth, I'm not sure if you're prepared to answer that.
I was on a webinar earlier today with some physicians. Based on that, my understanding is no. But yeah, it's best to ask a physician that. But if I recall, the answer is no.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there are no more questions in the chat, I would like to say thank you so much to Elizabeth, and also thank you to Nadine and Tora for being here to offer your expertise and your experience. And thank you to everyone for coming out today. I really appreciate your time. And Elizabeth, just before I close it off officially, is there anything else that you wanted to say as a final note?
No, just thanks for everybody for attending. I hope the start of your school year goes really well. And thank you, Danielle, for moderating. You did a great job.
Thank you. And thank you so much to everyone. As we mentioned, this is the first in our Let's Talk T1D education series. We'll be doing a series of sessions each month and more information on dates and topics to come. And once again, thank you so much to Elizabeth. And thank you all. Have a lovely rest of your summer and a great start to the school year.
Thank you.